99% of the time is going to do what's best for the child within the constraints that administrators put on them. But they can make it a lot easier for parents to get through this refusal process. So as I was talking with our school district, as I was talking with the teachers, and as I was talking with the New York State Education Department, I was very, very firm with the school superintendents, with the school boards, and with the New York State Education Department. I wanted those people to know exactly what I was concerned about. I wanted them to know that my child under no circumstances was going to participate in the tests that I wanted them to opt out of. And I was never ever rude to these people, and I never will be, but I was very, very firm with these folks. However, with the school teacher, the principal, I made them my best friends. Last year, at the end of last year, I sent flowers to my children's principal because we became, we weren't best friends, but we were on the same page. She knew where I was coming from. She respected that, and I built the same respect for her because I know she was under a lot of pressure. So we have the resources available to you on the New York State APES webpage. You can find the letter that you need to send to your school district. You send that letter to the principal, you send it to the teacher, you send it to the superintendent, you send it to all the board members. After they've received the letter, give them a call about a week later. Once they've received the letter, call them, and if they don't have time to discuss it right then, make a phone appointment to discuss it with them, or even meet with them in person. But it's important that you have that discussion with the school principal. And then once they receive the letter, they have a duty to tell parents that there is no opt-out provision. As much as I hate to hear that, and as frustrating as it is to hear that, by law, they have to tell parents that there's no opt-out provision. But that's okay. It's okay if they write you a letter that says there's no opt-out provision. Don't be scared. Generally that's not designed to scare parents away. Some administrators do use it as a scare tactic, but in my experience, most are not using it as a scare tactic. But regardless, when you get that letter, don't be scared of it. They're going to tell you that there's no opt-out provision. But technically, we are not opting out. We are refusing participation in these tests. And the New York State Education Department has a provision within their rules that says if a student refuses participation in these tests, they will be scored as a 999, which is a code that means that their test score is invalid. Basically, it's as if the test never existed for that student. They do not get a 0. They do not get any score at all. It does not count against the teacher, and it's not going to hurt your school report card, your district report card in any way whatsoever. And 999 means that it's an invalid score. And that's very important. I really like to make sure parents understand that there is no opt-out provision, but we can refuse these tests. And there's a specific code within the scoring system to accommodate refusals. So you've sent this letter into the principal. They've told you that there's no opt-out provision. You'll talk to them hopefully on the phone or maybe in person, and you'll help them to understand that you know there's no opt-out provision, but you're not opting out, you're refusing. And so now the school really doesn't have much of a choice but to allow you to refuse. So there's different procedures that schools will use on the day of the test. And you can read about those also on our website, so I'm not going to go through all of that. But I'm going to come back to the point I made earlier about the teacher being your best friend. When I first had my children refuse the tests, I approached the teacher and I spent probably about a half an hour talking to my children's teachers about why we're doing this, and specifically about how the process was going to work on the day of the test. Because I didn't want this to be stressful for my children, and I really didn't want it to be stressful for the teacher either. So we got this out in the open, and once it's out in the open with the teacher, the defenses of the teacher almost always drop, because now the teacher is feeling for your child. Once the teacher knows that you're serious about refusing, and you're going to refuse these tests, now she realizes that the comfort of the child is in her hands on the day of the test. And so in every experience that I've had so far with refusing these tests, which have been, last spring, then late last spring with some of the SLO tests, which I'm not going to get into, again in September with SLO tests and new teachers for my children, and then already this spring coming up with the tests that will be here next month. I've already had these conversations with the teachers. In every one of these cases, the teachers have been very happy to try and make this as easy for my children as possible, because I've helped them to understand how important this is for me as a parent. So this is very, very important in my opinion. You really want to spend the time, if you're worried about this, if you don't know the teacher, really spend the time to make friends with that teacher. There's a couple of questions that come up all the time, and one of those questions that I get all the time is, what happens to my school's funding if less than 95% of the students participate in these tests? I get this question all the time. Last year, I spent about 10 or 11 hours on the phone with the New York State Education Department to get an answer to that question. We also have this published on the New York State Allies website. You can read about it. But I'll spend a few minutes because I want you to be comfortable with the fact that your school district is not going to lose funding if less than 95% of students participate in these tests. This rumor goes around constantly, and there's a tremendous amount of misunderstanding about it. What happens, I'm going to step back. The 95% rule was put into effect basically to prevent school districts from testing only the students that they wanted to test. For example, it wouldn't be fair if the school districts only tested their smartest students and they sent all the other kids on a field trip just by coincidence on the day of the test. That wouldn't be fair, and the education department wanted to prevent this kind of fraud. So they said, if you have less than 95% participation, we have some rules in place. Well, the first rule is that the school district has to wear a dunce cap. Now, as far as I'm concerned, because of the problems with testing, I'm not at all concerned if my school district has to wear a dunce cap, call it a label, because less than 95% of students participated on these tests. I'm a parent. We're refusing these tests because that's what's right for my kids. So if my school district has to wear a label because of that, I'm okay with that. Is the school district going to lose funding? No, they are not going to lose funding. There's several reasons for that. Number one, the state of New York has a waiver for the next year and a half or so. It's very likely after that the waiver will continue. We'll have to see. But what this waiver does is it says that no new school districts can be labeled as a focus district for the next year and a half or so. And like I said, it will probably continue beyond that. What if a school already is a focus district? Well, if they already are a focus district, they're trying to get out of that status. They're trying to do what the education department tells them to do, so they're no longer a focus district. If a school district is a focus district and they're trying to get out of that status, and they successfully do, and at the same time they have less than 95% participation on these tests, they might still be stuck as a focus district. No new schools can become focus districts for the next year and a half, but a school who's trying to get out of focus status could be stuck in that status if they have less than 95% participation. But that does not mean that they lose funding. It means that they have to set aside possibly 5% up to 15% of their Title I funding into a separate account that might have to be used for state-approved programs. Now, to date, that has never, ever happened due to the opt-out movement. It's never happened with any school district. If it did happen, that money that's set aside goes right back to the school if they don't use it for any of the state-approved programs. And is the state going to require any programs because parents demanded that their children do not take these tests? It's highly unlikely. Highly unlikely. So I want to leave you with peace of mind that if your children refuse participation in these tests, if you're not a focus district right now, it will have no impact on your school district. If you are a focus district, it will probably have zero impact. If it has any impact at all, it will be very, very small, and it has never happened to date. That question I get all the time. I usually don't spend that much time on it, but I feel it's very important because parents who have not researched this issue yet have these questions in their mind, and it can be very stressful unless we clear up these issues for people. So I can talk for hours. I think I'll turn it over to you for a minute and see what kind of questions or what else you'd like me to speak about.
Are there questions? Anybody who has a question, either come on down or I can run the mic up. Either about, here we go.
Eric, my name is Ben Wright, and I'm a parent here in Plattsburgh. I was wondering if you have ever heard of parents who are refusing a test also tell the districts that they refuse the test instruction. What I'm saying is that if I'm saying my kid's not going to take a standardized test, the next step would say, and I don't want them sitting in class while you make them take practice instruction for a test that I'm not going to take. I was wondering if you've ever heard anybody play that line.
Yes, that's a very good question, and the answer is yes, I have. Let me expand on that. First of all, I'll relate it to my own two children. This year, my youngest daughter is in 3rd grade, and I have a very good relationship with her teacher. And her teacher has actually asked me in advance if I would approve of my child participating in the test preparation, because I've asked the teacher if she would do this. And so I've had the chance to look at those test preparation items in advance and decide if I want my daughter to do that. Now, the only way you'll have the opportunity to do that is if you have a good relationship with the teacher. Otherwise, they're not going to take the time to contact you and so forth. But if you have a good relationship with the teacher, they'll work with you and allow you to take a look at these materials beforehand. Now, I do know parents who do not allow their children to participate in the test preparation. Again, the way the teacher will handle that is probably going to depend on the relationship that you have with the teacher. I've heard situations where the teacher was very, very happy to accommodate the parent and found other work for the student to do. I've heard other situations where the teacher said, that's fine, your child can read a book, but I'm not going to give them any other educational items. I just don't have time or don't have the interest. So the answer is yes. I do know parents that have done that successfully. I've done it with certain test preparation items, not all of them, because some of them are okay, some of them are not. But yes, the answer is yes, you can.
Thank you, Eric.
My name is Mariana Shimo, and I'm a grandparent in Plattsburgh. And it sounded initially as if the schools that are labeled focus schools would have to comply more with all of this testing and stuff. But what if they chose to comply a whole lot less? And would that help get rid of the whole problem sooner?
That's a good question. I'm not sure that I have an answer for that. I think any support that we can get from the school districts helps our movement. So, for example, this whole situation called sit and stare, where some school districts will require students to sit and do nothing while the other students read a book, while other school districts will allow students to read, and even other school districts will provide an alternative activity. I think that support helps us a lot. When a school district is willing to provide another activity, or if the school district is willing to allow the children to read, that significantly helps our movement here. As far as focus districts, particularly doing these types of things to support parents, I'm not sure that a focus district would help the movement any more than a non-focus district, but I'll have to give that some more thought and maybe make a few phone calls to iron that out. I've not really given that any significant thought. So, but thank you for bringing it up. I'll look into that.
Any final questions for Eric? Well, Eric, thank you very much for sharing what you have done and what you know. That information is going to prove very useful for many of us in the area. So thanks.